TLDR. My girlfriend's toxic best friend publicly insulted me at my promotion celebration. When she defended him and demanded I apologize, I walked away and systematically dismantled the life I'd been building for her. Sometimes people don't understand what they have until it's completely gone. For 4.5 years, Sarah Michelle Thompson and I had what I genuinely believed was an unshakable relationship. We met during my second year at Goldman Sachs, when I was still grinding through those brutal analyst years, working 100-hour weeks and surviving on nothing but ambition and expensive coffee. She was working as a junior marketing coordinator at a boutique digital agency in Chelsea, fresh out of NYU, with a communications degree and dreams bigger than her studio apartment in Astoria could contain. I'm David Richardson, 31 years old, and I just made vice president at one of the most prestigious investment banks on Wall Street. The promotion had taken everything I had, 6 years of sacrificing weekends, missing family gatherings, and turning down social invitations to stay late, analyzing market trends and building client relationships. But it was worth it. The corner office, the 7-figure salary, the respect of colleagues who'd previously seen me as just another ambitious kid from Ohio trying to make it in Manhattan. Sarah was brilliant in ways that consistently amazed me. She had this incredible ability to see marketing angles that others missed, to understand consumer psychology on an almost intuitive level. During our early dating phase, I'd watch her analyze advertising campaigns with the same precision I brought to financial models. She could predict which social media strategies would fail before the first post went live. She was wasted at that boutique agency, handling small local business accounts when she should have been directing campaigns for Fortune 500 companies. We moved in together after 18 months into my penthouse apartment in Soho. It wasn't a casual decision. I'd been paying $4,800 a month for a place designed for one person, and combining our lives made financial and emotional sense. Sarah brought her creativity, her warmth, and her incredibly organized approach to domestic life. I brought stability, resources, and a shared vision of building something permanent together. Our life together felt like a carefully orchestrated symphony. Weekend mornings at the Union Square Farmers Market, where Sarah would select ingredients for elaborate brunches, while I handled the financial planning that made our lifestyle possible. Evening walks through Greenwich Village, discussing her MBA applications and my career trajectory. We weren't just living together. We were building a future with the kind of intentional precision that comes from two driven people who understand the value of strategic planning. Sarah had always been clear about her long-term goals. She wanted to get her MBA from a top-tier program, preferably Wharton or Columbia, and eventually start her own marketing consultancy. She'd identified a gap in the market for companies that could bridge traditional advertising with emerging social media trends. Her business plan was actually brilliant. I'd helped her refine the financial projections, and the numbers were compelling. She needed two things: the credibility that came with an Ivy League MBA and the initial capital to launch properly. I was more than willing to provide both. Over the course of our relationship, I'd invested heavily in Sarah's future. Not just financially, though that was substantial. I'd set aside $180,000 in a dedicated education fund for her MBA tuition, plus another $50,000 for living expenses during the 2-year program. But more importantly, I'd invested my time, my network, and my reputation. I'd introduced her to marketing executives at my client companies. I'd arranged informational interviews with Columbia alumni. I'd written recommendation letters that carried the weight of my position at Goldman Sachs. This wasn't charity or some patriarchal attempt to control her career. This was what partners do for each other. I believed in Sarah's potential, and I was willing to back that belief with everything I had. She was going to be successful regardless. But I could accelerate that timeline and eliminate the financial stress that derailed so many promising careers. Our relationship had the kind of stability that made marriage feel inevitable rather than uncertain. We'd already started looking at engagement rings, discussing potential wedding venues, debating whether we wanted kids immediately or after she'd established her consultancy. My mother had taken to calling Sarah her future daughter-in-law. During family phone calls, Sarah's parents, professors at a small liberal arts college in Vermont, had welcomed me into their family with the kind of warmth usually reserved for long-term relationships. But there was always this persistent undercurrent of tension, this low-level static that threatened to disrupt our otherwise harmonious life. And that static had a name, a face, and an increasingly problematic presence in our relationship: Marcus Alexander Chen. Marcus was 29 years old, though he often seemed determined to live like he was still 22. He'd been Sarah's college roommate's younger brother, one of those charming, creative types who'd somehow managed to insert himself into every significant moment of Sarah's adult life. According to Sarah, Marcus was her creative soulmate, her entrepreneurial inspiration, the one person who truly understood her artistic vision and business ambitions. According to my increasingly detailed observations, Marcus was a manipulative parasite who'd made it his life's mission to undermine our relationship through a carefully orchestrated campaign of psychological warfare. Marcus called himself a content creator and digital marketing guru, titles that sounded impressive until you examined the actual metrics. His Instagram account had 3,400 followers, mostly other aspiring influencers and college students. His TikTok presence was marginally better at 8,200 followers, but his engagement rates were abysmal, the kind of numbers that suggested purchased followers rather than organic growth. His YouTube channel, where he posted weekly videos about authentic entrepreneurship and creative business strategies, averaged about 200 views per video. In reality, Marcus lived in a 450 square foot studio apartment in Astoria that he shared with his collection of ring lights, camera equipment, and entrepreneurial self-help books. His income came from a sporadic combination of freelance social media management for local businesses, occasional brand partnerships that paid in products rather than money, and what appeared to be regular financial assistance from family members and friends who still believed his big break was just around the corner. But Marcus had mastered one crucial skill: the ability to present his lifestyle as aspirational rather than precarious. He'd convinced Sarah, and through her, several other people in their extended social circle, that he was living authentically while everyone else had sold out to corporate America. He positioned his financial instability as artistic integrity, his lack of traditional success as evidence of his unwillingness to compromise his values. More problematically, he positioned himself as the guardian of Sarah's creative spirit, the one person who could protect her from making the same mistakes he claimed to see in other talented people who'd lost themselves in pursuit of conventional success. Marcus was a master of subtle manipulation, the kind of psychological warfare that's difficult to call out directly because it never crosses into obvious territory. He never explicitly said anything negative about me, never made direct accusations or confrontational statements. Instead, he specialized in implications, suggestions, and carefully crafted comparisons that always seemed to position our relationship as somehow limiting Sarah's potential. If I took Sarah to Le Bernardin for her birthday, Marcus would casually mention some amazing little hole-in-the-wall Vietnamese place in Queens, where he and Sarah had discovered authentic cuisine that you can't find in those overpriced Manhattan tourist traps. If I surprised her with weekend getaways to upscale hotels in the Hamptons, Marcus would reminisce about their spontaneous camping trip to the Adirondacks, where they'd had real conversations under the stars. Without the artificial luxury that creates barriers between people. He had a particularly irritating habit of bringing up Sarah's ex-boyfriend Dylan Rodriguez, a struggling musician who cheated on her with another girl in his band and broken her heart during their senior year at NYU. But Marcus would never mention the cheating or the heartbreak. Instead, he'd focus on Dylan's passion for his art and his refusal to compromise his musical vision for commercial success. "Remember how dedicated Dylan was to his music?" Marcus would say with this dreamy, nostalgic expression. "There's something beautiful about being with someone who chooses artistic integrity over financial security, someone who hasn't traded their soul for a corner office and a 401k. The message was always crystal clear, even if it was never explicitly stated. I was the boring, materialistic choice, the safe option, the man who provided security and stability, but lacked the creative fire and artistic vision that Sarah really needed. Marcus positioned himself as the gatekeeper to an authentic creative life that Sarah was sacrificing for the comfort and predictability of dating a banker. And Sarah? She ate it up with a spoon. Every time I even hinted that Marcus might be out of line, every time I suggested that his comments seemed designed to undermine our relationship, Sarah would get immediately defensive. She'd accuse me of being paranoid, of not understanding creative people, of being threatened by her friendships because I was too practical to appreciate artistic personalities. "He's just being protective," she'd say, as if Marcus's behavior was a natural and appropriate response to seeing his friend in a relationship. "He's seen me get hurt before. He was there when Dylan broke my heart. He just wants what's best for me. He's like a brother to me, David. He's family. You don't understand the history we have." "You're being ridiculous. Marcus is one of my oldest friends. He's not trying to undermine anything. You're reading malicious intent into normal friendly concern." The most frustrating part was that Sarah was usually incredibly perceptive about people's motivations. In her professional life, she could spot manipulative clients, identify hidden agendas in business meetings, and navigate complex office politics with impressive skill. But when it came to Marcus, she had a massive blind spot that seemed to prevent her from seeing patterns that were obvious to everyone else. My friends noticed it immediately. During dinners or parties where Marcus was present, I'd watch their expressions as he launched into his subtle attacks. They'd shoot me looks that ranged from sympathetic to incredulous, clearly recognizing what was happening even if they felt too polite to comment directly. My colleague James Morrison, a fellow VP who'd become a close friend, pulled me aside after one particularly egregious evening where Marcus had spent 20 minutes explaining why corporate culture was destroying creativity while sitting in my living room drinking my scotch. "That guy is gunning for your relationship," James said bluntly. "I've seen it before. He's in love with her, and he's trying to convince her she's settling for you." But when I tried to discuss this with Sarah, she'd accuse me of being insecure and possessive. She'd point out that Marcus had never made any romantic moves, never expressed anything beyond platonic friendship. She'd remind me that he was dating other people, a rotating series of aspiring artists and creative types who never seemed to last more than a few months. What she couldn't see, or wouldn't acknowledge, was that Marcus didn't need to make romantic moves to achieve his goal. He was playing a longer game, systematically eroding her confidence in our relationship while positioning himself as the alternative to everything I represented. I'm a patient man by nature and by profession. You have to be in investment banking. You don't panic at the first sign of market volatility. You analyze patterns, gather data, and wait for clear signals before making moves. You let your opponents reveal their positions before you commit to a strategy. I decided to wait for Marcus to overplay his hand. I knew it would happen eventually. Manipulation campaigns like his are inherently unstable. They depend on maintaining plausible deniability, on never crossing the line into obviously inappropriate behavior. But manipulators also have egos, and egos create vulnerabilities. Eventually, Marcus would get overconfident. He'd make a move that was too obvious to ignore, too blatant for even Sarah to rationalize away. I just had to be patient and let him hand me the rope. The opportunity came 3 weeks ago, on what should have been one of the best nights of my professional life. I'd just been promoted to vice president at Goldman Sachs, the youngest VP in the investment banking division's history. It was a promotion that usually took 8 to 10 years to achieve. I'd done it in 6, through a combination of exceptional performance, strategic relationship building, and several high-profile deals that had generated significant revenue for the firm. The promotion came with everything I'd been working toward. A $350,000 base salary, plus performance bonuses that could easily double that amount. A corner office on the 32nd floor with views of Lower Manhattan. And most importantly, the respect and recognition of colleagues who'd previously seen me as just another ambitious analyst grinding his way up the corporate ladder. This wasn't just a career milestone. It was validation of every sacrifice I'd made, every weekend I'd worked, every social event I'd missed to stay late analyzing market trends and building client relationships. It was proof that my strategic approach to career development had been correct, that the years of delayed gratification were paying off in ways that would benefit both Sarah and me for decades to come. To celebrate, I decided to throw a party at our apartment, not just any party, a real celebration worthy of the achievement. I hired a catering company that specialized in corporate events, ordered several bottles of Dom Perignon, and invited everyone who'd supported me through the grueling years of building my career. The guest list was carefully curated. My closest colleagues from Goldman Sachs, including my mentor Richard Sterling, who'd guided my career development. My business school classmates, who'd become successful in their own fields. My college friends, who'd supported me through the transition from small-town Ohio to Wall Street. And my brother Michael, who'd flown in from Chicago specifically for the celebration. These were successful, accomplished people. Investment bankers, consultants, entrepreneurs, and executives who understood the significance of my promotion and the work it had taken to achieve it. They were also the people I'd been neglecting for months while Sarah and I dealt with the constant stress of Marcus's psychological warfare. And because I was still trying to be the good boyfriend, still trying to demonstrate that I valued Sarah's friendships and wanted her to feel included in my professional success, I told her to invite her friends as well, which naturally meant Marcus was coming. The party was scheduled for Saturday evening. Starting at 7 o'clock, I'd spent Friday evening setting up, arranging furniture to create conversation areas, setting out the catered appetizers, and chilling the champagne. The apartment looked perfect, sophisticated but welcoming, a space that reflected both my professional success and our shared aesthetic sensibilities. Sarah had spent the day at a spa, a gift I'd given her to celebrate the promotion. She looked stunning when she emerged from the bedroom in a black cocktail dress that I'd bought for her during a weekend trip to Boston. She'd had her hair styled and her makeup professionally done, and she looked every inch the successful banker's girlfriend at a career celebration. The first guests arrived promptly at 7, and within an hour, the apartment was filled with the kind of sophisticated energy that comes from successful people genuinely enjoying themselves. Richard Sterling was holding court near the kitchen island, regaling a group of younger analysts with stories about legendary Wall Street deals from the 80s. My business school classmates were clustered around the windows, comparing notes on recent market volatility while admiring the view of the Hudson River. The conversation was sharp, intelligent, and celebratory. These were people who understood the world I operated in, who appreciated the significance of my achievement, and who could engage in the kind of high-level professional discussion that I'd been missing during months of navigating Marcus-related drama. Sarah was in her element, working the room with the social grace that had first attracted me to her. She was charming my colleagues, asking thoughtful questions about their work, and demonstrating the kind of professional sophistication that made it easy to envision her as my future wife at similar events for decades to come. For the first time in months, I felt genuinely relaxed. The constant low-level stress of managing Marcus's manipulation campaign had lifted, replaced by the satisfaction of professional achievement and the warmth of being surrounded by people who understood and appreciated my work. Then Marcus arrived. He was 45 minutes late, which was typical. Marcus had never met a scheduled start time he couldn't ignore in favor of making a fashionably late entrance. He arrived wearing what I'd come to recognize as his standard uniform for events he wanted to disrupt. A vintage blazer that probably cost more than his monthly rent, designer jeans that were artfully distressed to suggest authenticity, and expensive sneakers that screamed, "I'm too creative for dress shoes." He'd clearly spent time styling his hair into that calculated, just rolled out of bed look that actually requires significant effort to achieve. He was carrying a bottle of wine, not expensive wine, but wine with an artisanal label that suggested he'd discovered something more authentic than whatever I'd be serving. Marcus made his entrance like a performance artist arriving at a gallery opening. He surveyed the room with the kind of critical assessment usually reserved for museum exhibitions, taking in the catered appetizers, the champagne service, and the well-dressed guests with an expression that managed to convey both appreciation and subtle disapproval. He immediately began working the room, but not in the way normal guests engage with other attendees. Instead, he treated the party like a networking opportunity, introducing himself to my colleagues as Sarah's friend and a digital marketing entrepreneur, who was really interested in how traditional finance intersects with creative industries. My colleagues were polite but clearly unimpressed. These were people who closed million-dollar deals before lunch, who could spot bullshit from 3 zip codes away. They engaged with Marcus the way you might engage with an enthusiastic but inexperienced intern. Politely, briefly, and with the kind of professional courtesy that doesn't extend to genuine interest. But Marcus didn't seem to care about impressing them. He had a different target, a different objective for the evening. He spent the first hour circulating, nursing his artisanal wine while conducting what appeared to be reconnaissance. He engaged in brief conversations with various guests, but I could see him watching, listening, gathering information about the dynamics of the room and my relationships with the people who'd come to celebrate with me. As the evening progressed and people became more relaxed, Marcus began to deploy his usual tactics. But tonight, with an audience of successful professionals and the confidence that comes from feeling like the center of attention, his approach was more aggressive than usual. He started with his familiar theme about the difference between authentic success and chasing money. But this time, he wasn't content with subtle implications. He began making direct comparisons between different approaches to professional achievement, positioning himself as the spokesperson for a more enlightened way of thinking about career development. "It's just interesting," he said during a lull in conversation, his voice carrying clearly across the room, "how some people define success by their bank account, and others define it by impact, by creativity, by staying true to their values, even when it's not financially rewarding." He took a long, deliberate sip of his wine, making sure he had everyone's attention. "I mean, anyone can make money if they're willing to compromise their integrity. The real question is, are you building something meaningful? Or are you just another suit collecting a paycheck while your soul slowly dies in a corner office?" The room became noticeably quieter. My colleagues weren't sure how to respond to what was clearly a provocation, but they could sense the tension building. James Morrison caught my eye and raised an eyebrow, silently asking if I wanted him to intervene. I stayed calm, but I could feel my jaw clenching. Sarah was looking increasingly uncomfortable, clearly recognizing that Marcus was crossing lines but uncertain about how to address it without causing a scene. Marcus, however, was just getting started. The attention of the room seemed to energize him, and he began to elaborate on his philosophy with the kind of passionate intensity usually reserved for religious zealots or motivational speakers. "The thing is," he continued, "success in corporate America is really just about conformity. It's about learning the rules of a game that was designed to extract maximum profit from human creativity and ambition. You climb the ladder, you get the promotions, you make the money, but what have you actually created? What legacy are you building beyond your own financial security?" Richard Sterling, my mentor, and a man who'd built a 40-year career in investment banking, set down his champagne glass with the kind of deliberate precision that suggested barely controlled irritation. That's an interesting perspective, Richard said, his voice carrying the authority of someone who'd spent decades navigating complex professional relationships. Though I'd argue that enabling economic growth, facilitating capital formation, and helping companies achieve their strategic objectives constitutes a fairly meaningful contribution to society. Marcus smiled with the kind of condescending patience usually reserved for explaining complex concepts to children. Of course, that's the story they tell you, he said. That's how they justify the system. But at the end of the day, you're still just moving money around to make rich people richer. You're not creating anything. You're not inspiring anyone. You're just optimizing someone else's wealth. The room was getting uncomfortable now. These were people who'd spent their careers building something meaningful, who understood the complex realities of how financial systems actually work, and who didn't appreciate being lectured by someone whose primary professional achievement appeared to be an Instagram account with mediocre engagement. But Marcus wasn't reading the room, or maybe he was reading it perfectly and simply didn't care about the disapproval of people he'd already written off as sellouts and conformists. Instead, he turned his attention to Sarah with that familiar expression of fake concern that made my skin crawl. "Sarah, I just want to make sure you're really happy," he said, his voice shifting to a tone of intimate concern that felt wildly inappropriate for the setting. "I know David provides security and stability. Siski's got the apartment, the job, all the traditional markers of success that we're supposed to want." He paused, looking directly at me with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "But honestly, a woman like you, with your creativity and vision and business instincts, you deserve someone who matches your intellectual and artistic energy. Someone who understands that success isn't just about money and status symbols. You could do so much better than settling for someone who just provides." The room went completely silent. I felt my champagne glass slip slightly in my hand. My colleagues looked stunned, not just at the content of what Marcus had said, but at the sheer audacity of saying it. This was a man who'd been invited into my home, who'd been drinking my wine and eating my food, who just stood up in front of my closest friends and professional associates and suggested that my girlfriend was too good for me. Sarah's face was bright red, but not from anger at Marcus. She was embarrassed that he'd caused a scene, mortified that he'd turned my promotion celebration into an uncomfortable confrontation. But she wasn't angry at him for the content of his statement. She was just upset that he'd been so public about it. And that's when something shifted inside me. Something fundamental and irreversible. The patient investment banker was gone. The man who'd been trying to preserve harmony, who'd been tolerating months of subtle psychological warfare in the interest of maintaining peace in his relationship, had just been replaced by someone much colder and infinitely more dangerous. I set my glass down very slowly and deliberately. I looked around the room at my friends and colleagues, all of whom were watching this unfold, with expressions ranging from shock to barely contained fury on my behalf. Then I fixed my eyes on Marcus and smiled. "That's a fascinating analysis, Marcus," I said, my voice quiet but carrying clearly through the silent room. "I'm genuinely curious about your reasoning." Marcus looked confused. He'd been expecting me to either explode in anger or retreat in embarrassment. He wasn't prepared for calm, methodical interrogation. "Since you're positioning yourself as an expert on what Sarah deserves, I'd like to understand your methodology. What exactly qualifies you to make this assessment?" "Well, I just think," Marcus started, clearly thrown off by my tone. "No, I'm genuinely interested," I interrupted, my voice taking on the tone I used during client presentations when I was about to dismantle a competitor's proposal. "You've made a very bold claim about Sarah's relationship choices. You've suggested that I'm somehow inadequate as a partner. I'd like to understand the criteria you're using to reach this conclusion." I stood up, suddenly feeling very much like I was in a boardroom about to deliver a presentation that would determine whether a deal lived or died. "Ladies and gentlemen," I announced to the room, "Marcus here believes that Sarah could do better than me. He's made it clear that he considers himself qualified to assess the quality of our relationship and make recommendations about her romantic future. So let's examine this investment thesis." Sarah grabbed my arm. "David, don't do this." I gently removed her hand and continued, my attention focused entirely on Marcus. "Marcus, you mentioned that Sarah deserves someone who matches her intellectual and artistic energy. That's a compelling criterion. Tell me about your own intellectual achievements. What's your educational background?" Marcus's face was starting to redden. "I went to Parsons for digital design." "Parsons School of Design. Excellent institution," I nodded. "And your GPA?" That's not really relevant." "Of course it's relevant. You're suggesting that intellectual compatibility is important for Sarah's happiness." Sarah graduated summa cum laude from NYU with a 3.97 GPA. She scored in the 99th percentile on the GMAT. She's been accepted to Columbia Business School with a partial scholarship. Surely your own academic performance is relevant to this discussion about intellectual compatibility? The room was captivated now. This was better than any corporate presentation I'd ever given. Marcus was stammering, clearly unprepared for this level of scrutiny. I mean, grades don't really matter in creative fields. You're absolutely right, I said smoothly. Let's talk about professional achievement instead. You mentioned that Sarah needs someone who understands creativity and business innovation. Tell everyone about your current business ventures. I'm building my personal brand, Marcus said, trying to regain his confidence. I'm creating content that helps people think differently about success and authenticity. I see. And what's your current monthly revenue from this personal brand? Silence. It's okay, I said gently. I understand that creative businesses take time to develop. But surely you have some numbers? I mean, you're giving relationship advice to a woman who's planning to launch her own consulting firm. You're suggesting that professional compatibility is important. Surely your own financial success qualifies you to advise on major life decisions? I pulled out my phone and opened my notes app, where I'd been tracking some concerning patterns over the past several months. Let me help, I continued. Sarah, how much has Marcus borrowed from you in the past year? Sarah's face went white. David, stop this. It's okay, I said gently. I know the answer because I've seen the Venmo requests. January, $800 for rent. March, $1,200 for emergency expenses. May, $600 for equipment upgrades. August, $900 for car repairs. October, $1,100 for what was described as a crucial business investment that was going to revolutionize your content strategy. I looked back at Marcus. So in total, you've borrowed $4,600 from Sarah in the past 12 months, money that came from the joint account that I fund, since Sarah's marketing coordinator salary covers her personal expenses, but not additional loans to friends. One of my colleagues, I think it was James, actually started taking notes, like this was a case study in financial analysis. But that's just temporary financial dependency, I continued. Let's talk about your investment in Sarah's future. You mentioned that she deserves someone who understands her business vision. I've invested $180,000 in Sarah's MBA education, plus another $50,000 for living expenses during the program. I've also secured her a summer internship at McKinsey & Company through my professional network, an opportunity that typically requires Ivy League connections or family wealth to access. I turned back to Marcus. What exactly have you invested in Sarah's future, besides your consistently negative opinions about the man who's actually funding her dreams? Marcus was sweating now, his carefully cultivated confidence evaporating under systematic examination. I support her creativity. I believe in her vision. I've helped her think about authentic approaches to business development. Belief is free, I said coldly. Results cost money. Speaking of which, let's talk about your living situation. I continued consulting my notes, the same detailed analysis I'd used to evaluate any investment opportunity. You live in a 450 square foot studio apartment in Astoria that costs $1,800 per month, approximately 65% of your inconsistent monthly income. You've been late on rent 7 times in the past year, requiring assistance from family members and friends. You've asked Sarah to co-sign on a car lease because your credit score is below 620. You eat dinner here at least 3 nights per week because grocery shopping for one person in your price range is economically inefficient. The room was completely silent now. Even Sarah looked stunned. She hadn't realized I'd been paying such close attention to Marcus's financial situation. And yet, I continued, my voice dropping to almost a whisper, you have the audacity to stand in my home, drinking wine I purchased, eating food I paid for, and tell a room full of successful professionals that a woman would be better off with you than with me. I walked closer to him, my voice taking on the tone I used during hostile negotiations. So let me summarize your proposal for the jury. You're suggesting that Sarah should leave a man who owns a $3.2 million apartment in Soho, who's funding her MBA at a top-tier business school, who's secured her dream internship, who's built a career that can support any lifestyle she wants to build, and who's demonstrated his commitment to her success through substantial financial investment and professional networking. I paused, letting the silence build. And instead, she should choose a man who can't pay his own rent without assistance, who borrows money from her monthly who lives in a studio apartment smaller than my office, and whose biggest professional achievement is an Instagram account with engagement rates that suggest purchased followers. I leaned back, crossing my arms. Is that an accurate summary of your position, Marcus? The silence was deafening. Marcus looked like he'd been physically assaulted. My colleagues were staring at him with expressions ranging from amazement to contempt. Richard Sterling was openly smiling, clearly appreciating the thoroughness of my deconstruction. But when I looked at Sarah, expecting to see relief or gratitude, or at least understanding of what had just happened, I saw something completely different. Pure, blazing fury, directed entirely at me. She shot up from her chair, nearly knocking it over in her haste. I cannot believe you just did that, she hissed, her voice shaking with rage. You completely humiliated him in front of everyone. How could you be so cruel? He humiliated himself, I said calmly. I just presented the evidence. You systematically destroyed him, she said, her voice rising. You turned my friend into a target for your corporate lawyer bullshit. This was supposed to be a celebration, and you turned it into a public execution. Sarah, I said quietly, he insulted me in my own home, in front of my colleagues at my promotion party. He suggested you could do better than me. He questioned my worth as a partner. What exactly did you expect me to do? I expected you to be the bigger person, she shot back. I expected you to ignore his comments instead of turning into some kind of ruthless prosecutor. This is exactly what he's been saying about you, that you're cold and calculating, and that you turn everything into a competition. And there it was, the moment of absolute clarity. She wasn't angry at Marcus for disrespecting me. She wasn't grateful that I defended our relationship. She was angry at me for defending myself effectively. She was upset that I'd exposed the man who'd been systematically undermining our relationship as the manipulative fraud he actually was. She was choosing him. Again. Apologize to him, she demanded, her whole body shaking with rage. Right now, apologize to Marcus for what you just did, or we're done. I mean it, David. Apologize, or this relationship is over. The ultimatum hung in the air like a physical presence. The entire room was watching this unfold, my closest friends and colleagues witnessing what might be the end of my relationship in the middle of what was supposed to be the best night of my professional life. I looked at Sarah, really looked at her. And for the first time in 4.5 years, I saw her with perfect, devastating clarity. She was standing next to the exposed wreckage of a man who'd just been revealed as a manipulative parasite, and she was defending him. She was demanding that I apologize to someone who'd insulted me in my own home, someone who'd been systematically trying to destroy our relationship, someone who'd turned my promotion celebration into his personal theater for psychological warfare. She was choosing Marcus over me. Not just in this moment, but fundamentally. She'd been choosing him all along, in every conversation where she defended his behavior, in every argument where she accused me of being paranoid, in every instance where she prioritized his feelings over mine. I didn't get angry. I didn't yell. I didn't try to reason with her or explain why her demand was unreasonable. I just smiled, a small, sad, completely final smile. I understand, I said quietly, and I meant it. I understood everything. I understood that the woman I'd been planning to marry had just chosen her toxic best friend over the man who'd been building a life with her. I understood that all my investment in our future, financial, emotional, professional, had been based on a fundamental misreading of her character and priorities. I understood that our relationship was over, not because of anything Marcus had done, but because of what Sarah had just revealed about herself. I didn't say another word. I walked to my bedroom, closed the door, and left her standing in my living room full of witnesses to her choice. The case was closed. The verdict was in. I could hear muffled conversation from the living room, Sarah trying to explain herself to my friends, Marcus attempting damage control, my colleagues processing what they'd just witnessed. But I was done being part of that conversation. I sat on my bed and began making a mental list of everything that would need to change. 20 minutes later, I heard the front door close twice. Sarah and Marcus had left together, a pair of humiliated allies retreating from a battlefield they'd chosen and lost. My friends stayed for another hour, offering support and expressing their amazement at what had just unfolded. Richard Sterling pulled me aside before leaving. That was the most thorough professional dismantling I've seen outside of a hostile takeover, he said. And her response tells you everything you need to know about her character. You're better off without her. James Morrison was more direct. She just chose a broke loser over a Goldman Sachs VP. Her judgment is fundamentally flawed. You dodged a bullet. But their support, while appreciated, was irrelevant. The relationship was over, not because my friends disapproved of Sarah, but because Sarah had revealed that she fundamentally didn't understand loyalty, partnership, or basic respect for the person who'd been investing in her future. After everyone left, I opened a bottle of the Dom Perignon I'd been saving for a toast to my promotion and Sarah's MBA acceptance. I sat in my living room, looking out at the city lights, and began planning the systematic dissolution of the life I'd been building with someone who'd never really been building it with me. For 2 weeks, Sarah tried everything to get my attention. Angry phone calls that went straight to voicemail. Text messages that progressed from fury to confusion to pleading. She sent mutual friends to plead her case, to tell me I was being unreasonable, that everyone makes mistakes when they're emotional, that she'd been defending a friend and hadn't really meant the ultimatum. I was a ghost, completely unreachable and entirely focused on the practical business of untangling a 4.5-year relationship. First, I methodically packed every single item she owned, not angrily or destructively, but with the same careful precision I brought to financial analysis. I cataloged everything, organized it by category, and boxed it professionally. When I was finished, I had 27 boxes stacked in the spare bedroom, ready for pickup. Then I changed all the locks, reset the security codes, and had her access to the building revoked. But the real work was more complex. Over the course of our relationship, I'd become deeply integrated into Sarah's professional and educational future. Extracting myself from those commitments required careful planning and precise execution. The first call was to Columbia Business School. I'd made a substantial donation to secure Sarah's admission and had committed to funding her tuition through my company's Executive Education Partnership Program. I explained to the dean that due to an irreversible change in my personal circumstances, both the donation and the tuition commitment were being withdrawn immediately. Sarah's acceptance had been contingent on guaranteed funding. Without my financial backing, her spot would be offered to someone on the waiting list. The second call was to my contact at McKinsey & Company. The summer internship I'd arranged for Sarah was incredibly competitive, the kind of opportunity that typically required Ivy League connections or family wealth to access. I explained that a severe conflict of interest had emerged that made my recommendation inappropriate and requested that the offer be rescinded. The third call was the most personally difficult. Sarah had been working toward a promotion to senior marketing manager at her current company. I'd been quietly networking behind the scenes, connecting her with executives at my client companies, providing strategic advice for her presentations, and leveraging my reputation to enhance her professional credibility. I called my friend, Jennifer Walsh, who served on the board of directors at Sarah's company. I explained that my personal recommendation was being withdrawn due to circumstances that compromised my judgment and made my continued advocacy inappropriate. The fourth call was to my attorney. I needed to ensure that the education fund I'd established for Sarah was properly dissolved and that there were no legal complications from withdrawing financial commitments that hadn't been formalized in writing. The fifth call was to my accountant. I needed to understand the tax implications of dissolving the education fund and to ensure that my financial records clearly documented the end of my support for Sarah's educational and professional development. By the end of the second week, I'd systematically removed myself from every aspect of Sarah's future that I'd been supporting. Her MBA funding was gone. Her internship was rescinded. Her promotion prospects had evaporated. The professional network I'd been building on her behalf was no longer available. She was on her own, facing the future with nothing but her own resources and whatever support Marcus could provide. 2 weeks after the party, Sarah showed up at my building. The doorman called up. She'd been trying to use her key card, but I'd already had her access revoked. She'd been attempting to get into the building for 20 minutes, growing increasingly frantic as she realized the depth of changes I'd implemented. I watched her on the security camera in the lobby, watching confusion turn to panic as reality began to sink in. I came down to meet her in the lobby, partly out of curiosity and partly to ensure she understood that this wasn't a temporary cooling-off period or a negotiating tactic. This was permanent. She looked terrible. The righteous anger from the party was gone, replaced by hollow desperation. 2 weeks of living with Marcus in his studio apartment had clearly been educational. Her hair was unwashed, her clothes looked like she'd been sleeping in them, and she had the kind of exhausted, defeated expression that comes from realizing you've made a catastrophic mistake. "David, we need to talk," she said, her voice shaky and uncertain. "No, Sarah, we don't," I replied calmly. "You made your choice very publicly, in front of witnesses. The conversation ended that night." "You can't throw away 4.5 years over one fight," she pleaded, tears starting to form. I was angry. I was emotional. I wasn't thinking clearly about what I was saying. "It wasn't a fight," I said, my voice remaining steady and professional. "It was a moment of truth. You were presented with a clear choice between your partner and the man who's been systematically trying to destroy our relationship for years. You chose to defend him. You demanded that I apologize to him. That's not a mistake made in anger. That's a revelation of your actual priorities." The panic was setting in as she realized I wasn't going to be moved by tears or emotional appeals. "But Columbia," she whispered. "The MBA program." "Yes," I said, letting the silence stretch. "About that, the admissions office called yesterday. Without guaranteed funding, your spot has been offered to someone else. The deposit deadline passed 3 days ago." Her face went completely white. "And the McKinsey internship?" she asked, though she clearly already knew. "Rescinded," I confirmed. "The managing director takes conflicts of interest very seriously. That opportunity won't be available again." She actually stumbled backward against the lobby wall, like I'd physically pushed her. "David, please," she whispered, her voice breaking. "You can't do this. This is my entire future, everything we planned together." "I already have," I said. "Actions have consequences, Sarah. You gave me an ultimatum. Apologize to Marcus or we're over. I chose over. Now you get to live with what that actually means." I looked at her tear-streaked face with something that might have been pity. "You wanted to know what it would be like to choose Marcus over me. Now you know. He's your partner now. He's the one you defended. Ask him to help you figure out business school. Ask him to help you rebuild your career. Ask him to provide the stability and security you decided you didn't need. I turned to walk back to the elevator. I hope he was worth it. The aftermath was swift and devastating. Sarah's life collapsed like a house of cards built on a foundation that turned out to be entirely my support and investment. Without the MBA, without the McKinsey internship, without my professional network and financial backing, her career trajectory completely derailed. She'd burned bridges at her current company by positioning herself for a promotion that never materialized. Her reputation in the industry took a hit when word got out that major opportunities had been withdrawn due to personal circumstances. She'd also made the mistake of assuming that Marcus's studio apartment was a temporary solution, that once I calmed down and came to my senses, she'd be able to return to our life in Soho. When it became clear that wasn't happening, she was stuck in 450 square feet with a man whose financial situation was even more precarious than she'd realized. Marcus, for his part, got exactly what he'd been working toward for years. He got Sarah. But he got the broken, bitter, financially desperate version of her. The woman whose dreams he'd helped destroy, whose future he'd helped derail, whose potential he'd helped waste. According to mutual friends who still occasionally update me, their relationship is a special kind of hell. Sarah is consumed with resentment, not just at what Marcus cost her, but at the realization that his jealousy and manipulation had destroyed the best opportunity she'd ever had. She spends her days applying for entry-level marketing positions that pay half what she'd been making, living in a space smaller than my closet. Watching her former colleagues advance in careers she'll never be able to rejoin at the same level. Marcus is dealing with the reality that winning Sarah meant taking responsibility for supporting her, something his income can't handle. His authentic lifestyle becomes much less appealing when it has to accommodate another person's basic needs. His creative energy is being drained by the constant stress of trying to make rent while dealing with a girlfriend who reminds him daily of his own inadequacy. They're trapped together by circumstance, resentment, and the shared knowledge that they destroyed something valuable in pursuit of something that turned out to be worthless. 6 months later, I received a letter from Sarah. Not an email or a text, but an actual handwritten letter delivered to my office. She'd lost weight, moved back in with her parents in Vermont, and was working as a social media coordinator for a small nonprofit, essentially starting her career over from the beginning. The letter was a masterpiece of regret and rationalization. She acknowledged that she'd made mistakes, admitted that Marcus had been manipulative, and expressed amazement at how quickly her life had fallen apart without my support. But even in apologizing, she couldn't quite take full responsibility. She described the situation as a series of misunderstandings and suggested that we'd both contributed to the breakdown in communication. She ended the letter by asking if there was any possibility of reconciliation, any chance that we could rebuild what we'd lost and learn from our mistakes. I read the letter once, filed it in my personal documents folder, and never responded. Not out of cruelty or revenge, but because the letter revealed that she still didn't understand what had actually happened. She thought our relationship had ended because of poor communication or mutual mistakes. She didn't understand that it ended because she'd revealed fundamental character flaws that made her unsuitable as a long-term partner. A year later, I heard through my business school alumni network that Sarah had attempted to reapply to Columbia's MBA program. Her application was rejected, partly due to her academic credentials being a year older, but primarily because she couldn't secure the financial backing or professional recommendations necessary for admission to a top-tier program. Marcus, meanwhile, had gained a small following by pivoting his content strategy to focus on lessons learned from toxic relationships and how to identify manipulation in professional settings. The irony was apparently lost on him. I didn't take any joy in their failures. I'd moved on completely, focusing on my career and eventually meeting someone who understood loyalty, partnership, and the importance of choosing your partner over people who want to destroy your relationship. But their situation served as a useful reminder about the importance of understanding what you have before you decide to throw it away in favor of something that looks more appealing, but turns out to be worthless. I didn't destroy Sarah's life out of revenge or spite. I simply stopped providing the foundation that had made her dreams possible. I stopped investing in someone who'd revealed that she didn't value the investment. I stopped building a future with someone who'd chosen to defend the person trying to tear it down. That's what done really means. It means the support stops, the opportunities disappear, the carefully constructed future collapses. It means the person who was building your life with you stops building and walks away, leaving you to figure out how to construct something from whatever remains. Sarah wanted to know what would happen if she chose Marcus over me. She wanted to see if I'd fight for her, if I'd compromise my dignity to keep her, if I'd accept being disrespected in my own home by someone she decided was more important than I was. Now she knows. Sometimes people don't understand what they have until it's completely gone. Sometimes they don't understand what they've lost until they're living with what they chose instead. Marcus thought he was winning a prize. Sarah thought she was making a principled stand for her friendship. They were both wrong. They won each other, and they lost everything else. That's what choosing your partner's enemy over your partner costs. That's what happens when you mistake the person investing in your future for the person holding you back. That's what done looks like when someone finally reaches their limit and decides to stop accepting disrespect disguised as friendship. I hope it was worth it. I really do.